Waghre, Policy Director at Internet Freedom Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Pahwa, let me come to you first. As far as this demand is coming from the COAI, the rationale, at least on the face of it, seems plausible that, look, I built the infrastructure. The OTT platforms are riding on this infrastructure. Why be shy from paying for it?
Thanks, Ashmit. Look, this is not a new argument. We heard this exact same argument, and I remember the date I was there, August 8th, 2014, at a TRAI seminar. And the TRAI has settled that matter in the sense that, this would amount to something called differential pricing, where the telecom operators would be charging different kinds of users differently. So, for example, a business user would be charged substantially more, whereas someone like me as a consumer would not be charged as much. Someone who's watching your show might not be charged as much. Now, let's not forget that the way the internet works is that every user pays their immediate mobile operator, their immediate internet service provider. So, for example, if I'm accessing the internet through Airtel, I'm paying Airtel. If you're running a startup and you have a server with, let's say, Hathaway, you would be paying Hathaway for bandwidth. So basically, you always pay the mobile operator or the telecom operator or the ISP that you directly engage with. And then between them, the ISPs have peering arrangements with which they pay each other. So effectively, if you were to say that anyone who started a website should pay a telecom operator for someone to also receive that data, that would amount to double charging.
Sure.
They called it free riding in 2014. They're calling it free riding now. But at the end of it, it's double charging. It doesn't work from an economic perspective because what will happen is that some people, it will just increase the cost of starting up also. So if you're celebrating Digital India, you're celebrating Startup India, it's also because for the business as well, the cost is relatively small. And if I have to go and do a arrangement with every single mobile operator so that their users can use my service and that I would have to pay them a revenue share, then it will just make it difficult for me to operate. So what you'll end up with is a separate ecosystem with Airtel, a separate ecosystem with Jio, and that interconnection that gives us the internet will no longer exist. So this honestly is a settled argument. It's an old argument. They're just trying to bring that same issue again and again and again. They've done it at TRA events I've attended over the last 4 years as well. Look, I don't see why we should be giving any importance to what they're saying. If they keep saying something over 6 years, it keeps getting ignored. Why should you give it any credence? Why is this discussion even happening today? I don't get it.
Sure. So essentially what you're saying is that it's old wine in a new bottle. But Prateek, if I may come to you and again raise the same issue.
Old bottle.
Like Mr. Pahwa was pointing. Old bottle. So this is essentially an issue that was argued at length at the time of the net neutrality debate. But that was some time back. The reason I point that out is because the COAI in its letter makes references to more recent conversations that we've seen in the EU, where the countries likes of France, of Italy, Spain, are in fact actively talking about fair formula, wherein there's a pricing formula that puts the part of the burden also on these OTT players, which are responsible for the bulk of the data consumption. Is that an argument that is beginning to get perhaps credibility in Europe, in EU, and perhaps percolate down here to India?
Yeah, so if I can just continue on that old wine analogy, right? I think it's basically old wine, and just now we've got a bottle imported from Europe, but it's the same old wine, right? And look, so as you pointed out, right? So in late last year, we had a number of senior officials from telecom companies in Europe making this similar argument, and then trying to say that look, OTT players are consuming a lot of traffic, etc., and they should have this. They should be paying their fair share, right? That's the term that's being used. Now it is so this. It is as Nikhil said, right? We're having the same argument again and again. Even there in Europe, there is opposition, right? Civil society organizations are opposing this. It is being pointed out that this creates a risk for net neutrality because you're creating a separate, you're potentially creating a separate class of customer for the ISP who they may be incentivized to offer differential level services to. It's also then, the other thing that's being introduced now is this larger issue with large technology companies and their dominance. And while that's a general concern, I think it's misplaced to try and fit this into that same bucket, because and what you're essentially doing by relying on these so-called large technology companies for revenue, you're further cementing the dependence and the dominance that you're so worried about, right? So it's also a flawed argument on that front, right? And thirdly, there's this question of, okay, if you're seeking regulatory intervention, the first question that you ask is, hey, where's the market failure, right? And in this case, look, as end users care about the two ends of the internet, right? If I could put it in those terms, they care about the quality they are receiving as ISP subscribers, and they care about the services they are consuming. They are not necessarily interested in how the ISP peering, etc., works, and how ISPs manage their costs, etc., over there, right? So there is it's a unit economics thing, and it's being parceled off as OTTs need to pay their fair share of thing, but there's no argument for that, but there's no basis for
Let
that.
me ask you then. So let me then ask you another supplementary question. We reached out to the BIF, the Broadband India Forum. They couldn't join us, but they shared a few comments over a phone call, and they essentially said that if this argument were to cut ice, that OTT players should be paying their fair share, then the argument that we are getting now from the BIF is that, look, we're also responsible, OTT players are also responsible for a 70% jump, 70% consumption, data consumption. So essentially, will the telecom companies be willing to share 70% of their data revenue is a question that the BIF is asking. Mr. Pahwa.
So one thing, the OTT companies, and this OTT is a telecom phrase, they're all internet companies, right? Internet companies also pay their immediate ISP. So all ISP revenues are also dependent on what they're already being paid by a service provider. It's just that in some cases, a service provider might actually be in Europe instead of being in India. But just let's look at it in a very simple manner. If I start an app, I will, under this regime that they're suggesting, have to go to an Airtel, a Jio, a Vodafone Idea, a BSNL, an MTNL, individually create arrangements with them to pay them so that you as a consumer can access my app. So, and then if let's say I choose which ISP I'm willing to pay, because I'm just a startup, I don't have much money. So I will, let's say, go with a Jio and an Airtel because they're the largest, which means a BSNL customer will need to buy an Airtel SIM to be able to use my app. This breaks the internet apart. The internet doesn't function like that. This argument will not fly in Europe either. It's been tried before. Let's not, the other part that I had noticed from, the reel that ran before.
If I may just interject for a very brief moment. If I may just interject for a very brief moment, Mr. Pahwa, the argument that the COAI, the telcos appear to be making is that, look, we don't want to get the money from the small and the big guy, from the small guys. Let them operate free of charge on our networks. We want to target the big users, the heavyweights, and we want to charge them this fair price as a part of operating on this system, on this infrastructure.
Was giving
Mr. Pahwa, you're on mute, I think.
No, I'm not on mute. Ashmit, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we get your audio, yes.
So I'd like to remind you of a point in time where Airtel was giving free access to Facebook, free access to WhatsApp. Why were they doing it? It is because these services get used by people like us that we buy mobile operator connections. The business happens because these services are on the internet. Now that these services are popular and that people are using them, they want to do this double charging mechanism. Look, it doesn't work. I also don't want any zero rating, but I also don't want them to be charging individual entities, double charging individual entities like this. And from a revenue perspective, let's not forget, back in 2014, telecom operators were profiteering. What were the rates? We were paying 256 rupees per GB. And that's why the internet in India was not growing. It is only because Jio came in, brought the prices down, that the internet has grown, consumption has grown, mobile operators have also grown. So even their business has shifted from being phone calling to largely being internet dependent, and they've done that without much pain. It is because of the consumption, because of user uptake that this has happened. There's a digital revolution in this country that has happened. Why do they want to spoil it by going and doing these shenanigans? I don't get it. And I would say that the government of India, if it ends up supporting the mobile operators in this, and we've had this horrible telecom bill, which somehow also seems to support, this kind of thinking, this will really hamper digital India. It will hamper our access to the internet. So let's not. I mean, I would say it's best if the TRAI and if the DOT ignores these complaints, and it's already been settled by the DOT also, by the way, when they issued their own response to a consultation that they held again back in 2014. These are principled matters which have been settled. Let's
Right,
not
Mr. Pahwa.
reopen them. It's pointless.
Right, Mr. Pahwa. So interesting debate this that we're seeing. We've heard the COAI. We'll, of course, continue to reach out to some of these OTT players as well to get their sense. But for now, the last word is yet to be said. But on that note, I'd like to thank both of our panelists for joining us and for sharing their perspective. But with that, it's time now to slip into a very short break. But coming up on the other side, heavy police presence on the streets of Beijing and Shanghai continues as China attempts to quell the protests against COVID restrictions. More details when we come back.